Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on a Tuesday afternoon. My name is Porter Bowman. I'm a proud member of the class of 2021.5, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event. We're joined tonight by former Congressman Bill Delahunt, Middlebury class of 1963. In a new series brought to you by Middlebury in DC. So first I want to give a quick thank you to Fariha and all the people at Middlebury in DC for helping get this going, and to Surya and all the members of College Democrats and other groups for supporting and publicizing this event. So I think people will still pour in. I'm sure people are just ending class, things like that. But I'll do a brief introduction before we get into our conversation. This will just be a nice laid back event. And then if you guys have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. And we will get to them in the Q&A. All right, well, I'll do a little introduction. Congressman Delahunt represented the 10th Congressional District in Massachusetts for 7 terms between 1997 and 2011. During his time in Congress, he served on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, where he chaired the Subcommittee on Europe and the Subcommittee on International Organizations, Human Rights, and Oversight in 2 different Congresses. He also served on the Committee on the Judiciary. After graduating from Middlebury, he graduated from Boston College Law School, served in the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve, and served over 20 years as District Attorney of Norfolk County in Massachusetts before running for Congress. And he now serves as the chairman of the Delahunt Group, a premier public policy and government affairs consulting firm. So Bill, Congressman, it's a pleasure and an honor to welcome you to virtual Middlebury.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I should note that was a very expansive introduction. I also spent 2 years as the interim director of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School.
That's wonderful.
And I was always hoping that I would see something similar develop on the Middlebury campus. So Porter, this is an opportunity for you. And it's obviously bipartisan. And we had, some speakers that were, very informative and fascinating and interesting. And I think it really, to a large degree, provided a platform and a venue for people to have conversation with political leaders from all over the world, not just from the United States.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Well,
so think about it. You should press the administration on, on doing something comparable, because other colleges and universities have similar programs. Middlebury should have one as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we could think of no one better to be our inaugural speaker. So I'm sure we're
okay.
Bigger and better things, but we appreciate your help in getting it started. So we'll start just in your experience at Middlebury. You've talked with me a lot about your, the love you've had for this place, and for being able to meet a lot of lifelong friends, and how to have a lot of wonderful experiences that you and your family have connected with this place. What has Middlebury meant to you? What were your 4 years like? And what was it like living and learning during, the civil rights movement and some, really interesting eras, and things going on during your time?
Middlebury had a lifelong impact on me. I think you will probably hear from other alumni over time that it was the best 4 years of their lives, and that the dearest friends that they have 30, 40, 50, almost 60 years later are those friendships that were forged at Middlebury. I think some of it had to do with the physical environment. Middlebury is, you can't hop on a a streetcar and get downtown. There was no place to hide. If you got to Middlebury and, you had reservations about other people, well, you didn't have much of a choice if you were going to, be social. And then it gave you an opportunity to discover, I believe, in great depth, what others were about, and you saw them in a different light. And that happened very quickly at Middlebury. And again, I think I mentioned to you that here we are almost 60 years later. There's a group of us that we meet via Zoom on Wednesdays at quarter to 12 and just chit chat for an hour or so on a variety of different topics. In fact, we brought on board for intellectual stimulation the former head of the Chinese department at Middlebury, John. I'm not quite sure of the last name, John Brisina, but he's a great guy. But he also, exudes that special quality about Middlebury. And for all of those that may be watching this, you're in a moment now, and I hope you're enjoying it, but that you're going to look back on and treasure. I was on the board of trustees for a while at Middlebury, and it really, it made me, I was concerned that there seemed to be pressure on the students. It didn't come from the faculty necessarily, or from the school, to really take on a lot of double majors, concentrations, as if, you had to get it done. I guess my advice is enjoy yourself there.
Right.
Okay. Because not only are you going to learn from the professors, but you're going to learn from each other. I mean, I came from very parochial environment outside of Boston, an Irish Catholic background. And we talk about diversity today. Well, back then it was an Irish Catholic city. And going to Middlebury, at that point in time, we might not consider Middlebury, as necessarily meeting today's standards about diversity. But for me, it was that experience to meet and live with and enjoy the friendship and the company of a wide array of people with the kind of backgrounds that led them to leadership positions, not just in government or the political life, but in the whole spectrum of, what makes up our culture.
Right. And you told me a great story about, speaking of diversity, your fraternity and your classmate, Ron Brown. What was that like?
Ron Brown eventually became the Secretary of Commerce, and he was African American, and just one of the great people you'd ever meet in your life. And in the fraternity system back then, and I was a SIG-Ep, which was the White House across from the old DU and the Deke. He was my big brother. That was the way the system worked. So we became very, very close. And he went on and had an incredible career. He was chief counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. When Ted Kennedy, who was a dear friend of mine as well, chaired that committee. But he had a great way with people. I mean, and in any event, he ended up becoming the Secretary of Commerce. And this was in 1996. I got a call from him saying, Deli, that was my nickname back in the day. Deli still is, if you're from Middlebury. And he said, I can't wait till you get here. We're gonna rock, okay? And about a week, maybe 2 weeks after that call, I got a call from a reporter here in Boston who asked me if I knew Ron Brown. And I said, yeah, he's a close pal of mine. And he said, well, he just died in an airplane crash. As Secretary of Commerce, he was leading a delegation to the Balkans, to Croatia, et cetera, and he crashed into a mountain. Years later, I led a congressional delegation to Croatia, saw the mountain that he crashed into, and I went to the town, and there was a little office, and I didn't notice it at first, but it was a museum to Ron Brown. Hmm. And I remember going in, and there was nobody there, and but there was a book to write your memories. I think it was about an hour that I just stayed there and wrote my memories of an incredible human being and a dear friend.
Wow.
Yeah. So that story of Ron Brown.
Right. No, it's remarkable. I mean, just the people that were there, and certainly the connections you were able to make it in that, and certainly a smaller school, and in a community that is, certainly vibrant today, but I'm sure it was at that time as well. As you came into your later career before Congress, what were some of the lessons you took from Middlebury and the people around you and the way you got to know people, and how did that lead into your desire to eventually run for Congress?
Yeah, well, I was part of that generation, the Kennedy generation. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in 1960, myself, Ron Brown, and another dear friend by the name of Mike Moan, who was president of the American Academy of Trial Lawyers, and we were co-chairs of Students for Kennedy in Vermont. And we all drove up the night before the election because Jack Kennedy was flying through Burlington, made a stop, and we had a chance to meet him. And he was very, influential, but I always knew that somewhere I wanted the opportunity to serve in a public way and hopefully make a difference. And I guess, being in that Middlebury environment, you had to learn, if you didn't know, if you didn't have it in you, you had to understand relationships, and you had to learn to listen. You had to learn to laugh. You had to learn to be open, and you had to learn to be tolerant. And you had to understand that, the world is such that it's not always fair. But I can remember there was a delegation from Africa that came and attended a town meeting. And they were up in the balcony with myself and several others. And they were absolutely it was disgraceful, the epithets that were hurled their way. And I remember being so angry, okay, that I was ready to go down and, get it on. But those are stark lessons. And, because it was small in terms of the physical environment, and we were all living together, you had to be tolerant. You had to be open-minded. And I'm not saying we were all thought the same. I mean, today a lot of my pals from there, were supporters of President Trump. I'm a large D Democrat, but openness, I think, was really important. And again, because of the isolation of Middlebury, but not a bad place to be isolated. I mean, the bucolic pastoral environment it's calming, okay? And at the same time, you know, it doesn't have the speed, if you will, or the excitement necessarily of the city, but it allows you to connect in a real substantial way with people that are going to be your lifetime friends. And you wouldn't meet them necessarily anyplace else.
Wow. I mean, it really is a special place, and it's something definitely that's been important to me, and certainly important to peers and classmates of years past. You know, when you got into Congress, you talk about your ability to form relationships. You know, you guys as Big D Democrats were in the minority in the House for most of your terms in Congress.
The last three, I was in the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what was that? What was it like, both in the majority and the minority, of forming relationships with maybe people on the other side of the aisle, you know, as you sort of try to get things done and be bipartisan?
Well, you know, you just said it. To get things done, you had to be open, and you had to understand that if you're going to influence people, you don't necessarily yell at them. You don't confront, um, but to influence them starts with, you know, a relationship as one human being to another. And those grow. You can still have disagreements, profound policy differences, but understand their humanity. If you understand the other and his or her humanity, you're going to get things done. One of the, you know, people say, well, you passed a lot of bills, and what was your proudest achievement? And it was that I think it was 2009, there's a paper that circulates on Capitol Hill called The Hill. And they did a survey of Republicans. And, you know, some 200 Republicans. And the question was asked, well, who are the most bipartisan Democrats? Okay. There was a couple of hundred Democrats. And and I came in the top 10, and the reporter came up to me and said, we can't believe it, because your politics, you know, you're a Kennedy liberal. But I was able to get things done because I cared about others. Okay. And actually, the reporter said to me, you came in number 2. We couldn't believe it. We thought there was a mistake. Okay. But a lot of it was what I carried from Middlebury into elective office, both in the DA's office, which was elected as well for 22 years, and then the 14 years in Congress. Understanding that you know, if you're going to make progress, you got to talk to each other, and you got to care about each other, and you got to respect each other. And if you can do that, you can be a Ron Brown, you can be a Ted Kennedy. I mean, I always found it interesting. Okay, the Republicans in the Senate, they love Ted Kennedy on a personal basis. But every election, they'd pound away at him for fundraising purposes. Okay. But when he died, it was a John McCain, an Orrin Hatch. It was time after time, Republicans genuinely said, you know what? He made a difference in my life. Not because of policy necessarily, but he made a difference because he was my friend. And I could talk to him, and I could open up. And yeah, sometimes we could reach an agreement. And that's really, I think, the success and part of the value of living and going to a college on the Hill that has the good fortune of creating an environment that allows you to grow in terms of your personal relationships.
Absolutely.
And I'm concerned about what I see happening now, not at Middlebury, but like President Obama, for example, speaking about how social media
Mm.
is, is dividing the country. I have great respect for the president. I know him personally. Uh, and I can feel it too, because I don't know how to use social media, as you can tell. Okay. And I understand the benefits are significant, but how do we communicate and get to know each other in a way where we can move forward and embrace what I think most Americans, can describe or would feel are American values. Now, it's I'm concerned about
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's a different era. Even over the last 10 years, a lot has changed, certainly.
it. A lot has changed, and it's your generation, Porter. You guys got to figure it out.
Right. Right. It's a big task, but no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Talk also about your work you've done a lot in foreign affairs. You've talked about your leadership and your relationships with other foreign leaders, and sort of even your work within Congress. Maybe share some stories from that work, and how you were able to build those relationships and make progress.
Well, again, it goes back to personal relationships. Okay. I mean, you got to build trust, and you got to be open to what they say, and you can disagree with them. Okay. And you can do it vociferously, but in a way that uh, they understand that you're not diminishing them necessarily as human beings, but you just have a different view, but you can care about them. And there's some areas you can agree on. I got a lot of criticism because I spent a lot of time in Venezuela
Hmm.
when Hugo Chavez was the president. And we've had a great relationship. And he said to me, "What can I do to improve the uh, relations between the U.S. and Venezuela?" And I gave him a list of things that he should stop doing. Okay. And then I got thinking, and I said, "You know what? I represent Massachusetts. I come from the Northeast, and the price of oil is going through the roof, and a lot of low income people can't afford it. And I had sent letters to all of the major American oil companies asking them to consider an approach where they would sell home heating oil to low income Americans." Didn't get one response,
Hmm.
not one response. So I related that to Chavez, and he said, "Well, Citgo is a subsidiary of our national oil company, PDVSA." So what happened was he discounted it by about 50% off the market price for oil, and he continued it for some 10 years and kept a lot of people warm.
Hmm.
So I would do that over and over and over again, but that was based upon a personal relationship
Right.
and an understanding that, hey, it's like the vaccine, okay? Or it's like a pandemic. We gotta help each other.
Right. That's a team effort. Absolutely. Um, Thinking back to your time in Congress, and thinking about today, I mean, there's certainly an old guard of Democrats that are still in Congress. You know, one of my favorite stories of yours is, that you lived in a DC row house with Senator Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin, and George Miller. It's such a great story. And maybe talk about that, but also how you see the Democratic Party today and wrestling with its identity, and how perhaps the Democrats of your day are wrestling with maybe a new generation of Democrats with priorities across the political spectrum.
Right. Well, to talk about the House, I don't want anyone who's watching this, if it's archived later, to think that this was a mansion. It's better described as a dump or a slum. And the house was owned, it was a very short walk to the Capitol and a short walk to the office buildings. George Miller owned it, and there were 2 bedrooms upstairs. He had the big one. And Dick Durbin had one that was a much smaller one, which was kind of like a oversized closet. And myself and Chuck Schumer split the living room. We each had a cot in the living room. So the picture of fine dining, okay, and embassy receptions, believe me, I remember saying, I was interviewed by, I think it was the New Yorker, on Chuck Schumer and his hygiene. I'll just leave it that way, okay? And I said, well, we didn't have any, we had no cockroaches. And the interviewer said, well, why? I said, because our rats scared them away, okay? It was a tough place to live, but it was a place where we had a lot of laughs and a lot of good conversations and where friendships were formed, okay? But the life itself was very hectic. It was 24/7. You get on a plane, you come back home, you do events all through the district. And then particularly if you chaired a committee, you know, oftentimes you had to do your homework. So, you know, there were, you know, we'd get, a lot of us would, you know, end up getting back to the house at 10:30, stay up to maybe 11:30, and then get up at, you know, 6 in the morning and begin the day. But good memories.
Absolutely.
And where the Democratic Party is now, we'll find out. You know, I think that, you know, I'm kind of a, how shall I say, you know, I consider myself a liberal, but I guess, you know, some today would think that I'm a moderate, but I'm in the mold of a Ted Kennedy, because we were able to get things done. It's a question of, if you want to make change, you have to know how to influence people. And you can give great speeches, you can have great ideas, and you can have passion. But are you going to be able to move people that, particularly in a collegial environment like Congress, are you going to be able to nudge them in a direction that you want people to go? I get very involved in the relationship with Cuba. It had never, hardly ever been discussed in the Congress before. And, you know, I remember saying, why are we having this issue with Cuba? The Cold War is over. You know, they're not going to invade, okay? Don't we owe to ourselves and the people of both countries a dialogue? So myself and 49 other members of Congress, 25 Republicans and 25 Democrats, created what we call the Cuba Working Group. And we moved that relationship to the point where Obama, when he came in, really opened it up. And if you remember, there was a formal diplomatic relationships were formed. And I think we were on a very, very positive course to have put that relic of the Cold War behind us. President Trump obviously has taken a totally different viewpoint. But again, it's about influencing people. And we kept it bipartisan. And we wanted to be able, and we would have discussions and good debates. And the more that people thought about, I mean, you couldn't go to Cuba.
Hmm.
I mean, is there anything as silly as restricting Americans' constitutional right to go to Cuba? Okay? We weren't at war. They're a poor country. I used to promise all my constituents on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard that I would be with them on the beach if those Cubans were going to invade us. Okay? In other words, you'd utilize humor to try to make a point. So again, that's how you, and if people think that you come in and you don't listen, that somehow you're going to win, you're not going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, maybe perhaps one more question before we get into anyone watching. Please feel free to type in some questions into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them right after this. I'm curious as well. You've told me a lot about kind of where we go from here. Our generation, my generation, is thinking a lot about the big issues of our lifetime and how we're gonna handle them in such an uncertain year. There's a lot going on and a lot of issues to handle. But just talk a little bit about the values of patience and sacrifice and of healing.
Right.
Maybe some lessons that Middlebury students can keep in mind today.
You know what I notice about the younger generations, plural? There really hasn't been any sacrifice in their lives. I know this is a sweeping, broad, untenable generalization, but I guess I'm referring to a conversation I had with a tremendous guy by the name of Charlie Rangel. He represented Harlem and well respected. He was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And he said to me, Bill, it was a bad day when the draft ended. And he made a very good point. He said it was the one place that we all came together. And we had a bond. And we were all in the foxhole. Now, I'm not suggesting we reinstitute the draft. He wasn't really talking about it in military terms. What he was talking about was the fact that all Americans were in the same boat. Whether you came from Kentucky or Harlem or Los Angeles or Boston or Middlebury. And you learned, that was an education. And are we willing to make the sacrifice, not monetarily, okay, but a commitment where we put others, we recognize, we recognize that to live life with purpose means to give up something, to put the mask on. Not that you want to wear a mask, but you care about me. You show your respect to me. Make the sacrifice.
Right. That's a great point. We have a question from our audience. First is, how much control do you think party leaders have over individual members? And were there times where you went directly against party leaders on a particular issue?
I went against party leaders a lot. What leverage do they have is, they can make committee assignments. They can help in fundraising. But by and large, the leadership on both sides, okay, have to understand their membership and where that membership is as far as issues are concerned. we don't really have a lot of party discipline. This is not a parliamentary democracy that falls, when I voted no confidence, you're still going to be around. Okay. Hey, would the party leaders get mad? Yeah, sure they get mad, but so what? You know.
Right.
Um, and they would know too. I'm trying to think of an issue. Oh, can you stop talking about that? I said, no, I'm not. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, in the house with the four of us, we would often disagree, not on major issues, not on large issues, but are the parties realigning? Boy, this is going to be fascinating the next 4 years, presuming that Joe Biden is the president. And I think that Biden has that skill set that I'm referring to. People love. I know Joe pretty well. I created the first domestic violence program in the country when I was the DA. It was very, very successful, and I was always going down to DC to testify before the Judiciary Committee, which he chaired at the time. And that led to the National Violence Against Women Act, okay, that was really significant and created, it impacted the culture in terms of the role of women in America, in American life. But Joe's strength is he's liked. And I was saying to somebody recently, you know why he's going to be successful? He's an old man. He's like me, okay? In fact, I think I got a year on him, maybe, 2 years on him, okay? But what separates Joe from a lot of others is that he's a regular Joe, okay? He's an old-time Joe. And he cares, he deeply cares. It's not about him. He really cares. And that comes out, and this got nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican, but that comes out. And where do the parties go from here? They'll settle. That will work.
Right. Interesting. We've got another question from Keith Chattenover, who's a student at Middlebury, and he's actually a county commissioner of Dukes County in Martha's Vineyard.
I know that well.
Yeah.
Commissioner, how are you?
Yeah. And he wants to know that, he always tells people that the Cape and Islands aren't just a bunch of rich people. And how did you manage to represent and advocate for a district that has a lot more needs and is much poorer than people assume?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, we have a lot of wealthy people coming down to Nantucket and the Vineyard, but when they go home, how do you sustain them? I can remember the average income in those not just the two islands, but also in the Cape, was dramatically lower than the rest of Massachusetts. So it was a question of hard work and advocating for them and creating jobs and making sure that small businesses could survive, that you had a water issue. You had to protect, the drinking water on the Cape because it was sole aquifer. All of these things. And you listened and you provided constituent services. We had a lot of veterans living on the Cape. And I remember, I think I got the first primary care health center for veterans. And a lot of people saying, there's not enough people here. It was unbelievable. There were like 3,000 veterans who wouldn't have health care, or at least readily accessible health care, and they'd have to go into Boston. So it was those small things, but small things make a big difference in people's lives sometimes.
Right. Has the need, we have another question, has the need to raise money continuously and also just to be outside of DC impacted the ability to have these kind of relationships that you've talked about?
No, you can have the relationships, but the most corrosive aspect of American life right now, other than the downside of social media, is the way we fund campaigns. We spend too much time raising money. It gets messy. I've always been a supporter of public financing. And the alternative would be, what they do in Britain and in Israel, which is shorten the election period down to a month or, maybe 2 months or whatever. But it's filthy with money now. It is filthy. And I think it's very, very corrosive and very dangerous to our democracy. And yeah, you spend a lot of time. I mean, I had what was called a safe seat. But every time I turned around, I was getting a call from some colleague, can you do a fundraiser for me on Nantucket?
Right.
Because they didn't have access to that kind of money. And in the summertime, I'd be there doing that. And it takes time and it takes energy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Time that could be better spent elsewhere.
Right. Absolutely. Another question is, the top 3 Democrats right now are all over 80. Do you think it's a good idea for reps to stay in office so long, or do you think there's a point where they should pass the torch?
I think you need to combine when you're young, okay, it's time for change. When you get a little bit older, the maturity of experience. Okay. I leave it to the people. I don't think, and again, going back to Biden, okay, someone with his experience, but also his relationships with McConnell. That's a genuine relationship, a personal relationship, which could make a difference at some point in time. I don't think that I'm not in favor of term limits. I could have stayed a lot, probably for the rest of my life. I wanted to move on. But at the same time, usually you learn one way or another, to run and not to run.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people get, they're down there, they don't think, that they're vulnerable. They get a sad awakening, okay? But my motto would be the vigor of youth combined with the maturity of experience is a perfect mix.
I like that. Thank you. We've got a lot of questions still flowing in. We got a few more we can take here. How do you see America being able to recover its standing in the world, especially vis-a-vis China? It's a big question.
It's a very big question. Again, I'm one who advocates establishing positive relationships, but I think you've got to be clear with, and I don't use the term enemies, but competitors. Mm-hmm. Okay. You got to play by rules. Okay. And I'm satisfied that in the case of China, they don't always play by the rules. But to the benefit of humanity, a working and agreeable relationship with a superpower like China is in the best interest of everybody. Absolutely in the best interest of everyone. Has there been the stealing of American intellectual property? Yes. Of course, what we never understand, and we never, why we're critical, for example, don't interfere with our elections. Yeah. And I support that. But what about other countries? Do we influence their elections? Have we influenced their elections? Of course we have. Okay. I mean, go through Latin America. Okay. I forget who said it. Some president said it regarding some banana republic dictator. well, he's the son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
Hmm.
Okay. What kind of a message does that send? Okay. And, do we try to influence elections elsewhere in the world? You bet we do. Okay. And yet we take offense, justifiably so, when, they attempt to manipulate and influence, our elections. Okay. And we should be, really clear about that. But at the same time, what America suffers from globally in terms of how we're perceived is that we're hypocritical.
Hmm.
That is something that, that we should be aware of. I mean, don't spy on us, China. But when we sell you a large Boeing airplane for use by the Chinese premier, of course we've bugged it. We've actually went in and installed listening devices. So we got to look at our own behavior. Okay? We got to look at our own behavior and be clear that we're not soft,
Right.
but we want to work with others. And I mean, rejoining the climate accords, the Paris Climate Accords, the World Health Organization. I mean, none of them are, they might not be perfect, but you're not going to find any perfection. But you've got to come in, you got to solve a lot of problems, and you can only do it in a collaborative way.
Mm-hmm. It's a great message. I see a few more questions here as we finish up. One, was there ever a time that you voted for something that wasn't popular with your constituents? And what do you think the responsibility of a member is if they think that something is good for the country, but maybe not popular in their district?
Mm. Yeah, I think obviously you want to factor into the equation, but in the end, was it the English philosopher? What you owe your constituents is your judgment. Okay. And you really, I took a lot of what would be considered tough votes. Okay. Because it's what I believed. And you know what? If I explained it to people, it's, yeah, you got a point. And I was around often enough so that, they trusted my judgment. But it's a factor to consider. I remember I was an ardent opponent of the invasion of Iraq. I thought it was it was a debacle, and has hurt America, in terms of how we're viewed ever since we invaded Iraq. And it's only got worse. And I think, it hurt us in terms of our claim to moral. Excuse me, the dogs. The dogs
Got a lot of fans.
Yeah, but yeah, I took tough votes. I remember walking in Falmouth, okay, to a middle school, and I was going to do a town hall, and I figured 5-10 people would show up. I'm walking in, and this is before we invaded, and I had just come back from the Middle East, and I knew that we were going to do it because there was a base that I was on that was the size of Boston. Okay, you could feel the momentum, and I could feel what was coming out of Cheney and Rumsfeld, and I said, "This is a horrible mistake we're going to make." And I walked into that town hall meeting, and there were a lot of guys around, with VA hats on, etc. And I said, "Hey, before I go any further, let me tell you, I'm not going to vote to go to war." The place erupted, okay, in a positive way.
Right.
And I remember saying, that's pretty good. But having got it out there, the American people knew that was a mistake. Okay, there were no weapons of mass destruction. So what did we end up doing? We got involved in a war that cost us trillions of dollars. We never paid for it. Okay, we did it on the credit card. We never passed a tax, a war tax. First time in our in history that happened. And a lot of people, obviously including Americans, but a lot of people died, and we lost our claim to moral authority.
Hmm. Well, I'm going to end. That's a very thoughtful answer. I'm going to end with on a sort of a more fun, positive question that we've gotten. You talk about visiting JFK or seeing JFK, and while you're at Middlebury, who's your idol? Maybe not necessarily politically, but who was your idol while you were a college student?
Well, I really loved Kennedy. Okay, I mean, here I am, an Irish Catholic kid from Boston. He was, I mean, he was, when I was at Middlebury, he really had captured a generation and really inspired us to go into public service.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was the time of the missile crisis. And I remember we were in the kitchen at the CF House, and we were convinced that we were going to go to war. Okay. And I remember how he conducted himself during all of that. And he was truly a leader. He inspired people. He was thoughtful. I became extremely close to his brother Ted, who is a dear friend of mine, who I really miss even now. He's been dead over 10 years, but Jack Kennedy was the inspiration for a whole generation. That's why we all got into politics. I mean, I think we were oriented that way, but I mean, hell, I mean, that was, your age, here we are, the life we've got ahead of us. We're going to change the world. We're going to make the world a better place. We're going to end, Jim Crowism. We're going to, make America, tolerant. And, we've had speed bumps along the line, but at that moment at Middlebury, he was the one that I looked up to.
I love that. Well, Bill, it's been fantastic. It's been great getting to know you personally, and it's been great to have your lessons and perspectives and stories shared with the greater Middlebury community, and I know we all appreciate that.
Well, I got to tell you, I love the community. It's a family, and enjoy. Don't take too many courses. Get to know each other.
Right.
Okay. And maybe one of these days I'll get up on the campus once we get the vaccine going and have a chance to have a beer with you. Okay.
We love that, and I'd love that.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks.
Take care. Goodbye, everybody.
For coming, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.